Welcome back to Pulse of the Planet, bringing you the latest news from around the world. For decades, the United States and Canada enjoyed a close, prosperous partnership, an example to the world of how two nations could thrive together. Their relationship was built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared vision for economic growth. Generations of families and businesses on both sides of the border benefited from this unique bond, which fostered innovation, stability, and opportunity. Their economies were deeply intertwined, with goods and services flowing freely, creating jobs and prosperity on both sides of the border. Every day, millions of dollars in trade crossed the border, supporting industries from automotive to agriculture, and connecting communities in ways that went far beyond economics. But that era is over. On September 20th, 2025, the two neighbors are locked in a bitter economic conflict. The trust that once defined their relationship has been replaced by suspicion and frustration, as both sides dig in for a prolonged battle. Friendly cooperation has given way to angry words and punitive actions, a full-blown trade war threatening decades of progress. Tariffs, sanctions, and retaliatory measures have become the new language of diplomacy, leaving businesses and workers caught in the crossfire. The world is watching as former allies become rivals. Global markets are on edge, and leaders from Europe to Asia are closely monitoring every development, knowing that the outcome could reshape international trade for years to come. The shift didn't happen overnight, but recent events have escalated tensions dramatically. A series of policy changes, heated negotiations, and public accusations have pushed both countries to the brink, with each new headline fueling uncertainty. What began as minor disputes has exploded into a crisis, with the U.S., led by President Donald Trump, accusing Canada of unfair practices. The rhetoric has grown sharper and the stakes higher as both governments refuse to back down. In response, Canada is charting a new course, seeking partners and markets far from its southern neighbor. Canadian officials are forging new trade agreements determined to reduce their reliance on the U.S. and protect their economy from further shocks. This video will explore how this conflict began, the actions taken by both governments, and the impact on businesses and families. From small-town shops to major manufacturers, the effects are being felt across the country, changing lives and livelihoods. We'll also examine the internal challenges Canada faces as it tries to forge a new path in a world where economic alliances are rapidly changing. As the nation adapts to this new reality, the choices made now will shape its future for generations to come. The U.S.-Canada economic crisis didn't erupt overnight. It was the result of years of simmering tensions and unresolved disputes over lumber, dairy, and a host of other goods that quietly built up beneath the surface. These seemingly minor disagreements, often dismissed as routine trade squabbles, slowly accumulated, creating a foundation of mistrust and frustration on both sides of the border. In the past, these issues were typically handled behind closed doors, with negotiators working late into the night to find common ground. But as the years went by, the spirit of quiet compromise faded. Trust between the two countries began to erode, and what were once private disagreements soon spilled into the public arena, turning into highly visible political battles. The U.S. started to view Canada less as a friendly partner and more as a tough competitor, accusing it of unfair trade practices. Meanwhile, Canadians increasingly felt bullied and marginalized by their much larger neighbor, fueling resentment and a sense of injustice. The return of President Trump to the White House marked a turning point. His administration's hardline America First stance cast Canadian imports as direct threats to American jobs and industries, and the rhetoric around trade became more aggressive than ever before. Suddenly, every aspect of the cross-border trade relationship was under intense scrutiny. Long-standing agreements were questioned, and even minor disputes were magnified, turning what had been manageable tensions into a raging firestorm of controversy. The language from both sides grew sharper, the threats more serious. Cooperation gave way to confrontation, and the media spotlight only intensified the sense of crisis, making compromise seem further out of reach. Prime Minister Mark Carney now found himself facing a radically changed America, one that was less interested in partnership and far more focused on asserting its dominance, leaving Canada in a precarious position. The manageable fights of the past had escalated into a full-blown crisis, threatening the very foundation of Canada's economy. Factories closed, jobs were lost, and uncertainty spread across the country as the stakes grew higher. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, one that would not only test the resilience of both nations, but also reshape the future of North America's economic landscape. The world's most successful trading relationship, built over decades of cooperation, now teetered on the brink of collapse, with consequences that would be felt far beyond the border. What would follow would test the strength, resolve, and ingenuity of both nations like never before, as they faced a crisis that would define a generation. In August 2025, President Trump unleashed sweeping tariffs on Canadian exports, some as high as 50%. These tariffs were not just a minor adjustment, they were a seismic shift in trade policy. Key industries like steel, aluminum, lumber, and auto parts were hit hard, with the White House claiming it was time to rebalance the relationship. The move was seen as a direct challenge to Canada's economic stability. The tariffs were targeted, sparing US-dependent energy imports but maximizing pain for Canada's export-driven economy. This strategic targeting left many Canadian businesses scrambling to find new markets. This was no longer negotiation, it was economic warfare. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure was mounting on both sides. The impact in Canada was immediate. Orders cancelled, factories slowed, and layoffs began. The ripple effects were felt across the nation, from large cities to small towns. Steel and lumber industries were especially devastated, sending shockwaves through communities. Families who had relied on these industries for generations faced an uncertain future. The tariffs were a calculated move, designed to force Canada to the table on American terms. The US administration believed this would give them the upper hand in renegotiating trade deals. But instead of backing down, Canada faced a critical choice: submit or chart a new course. The nation stood at a crossroads, with its leaders weighing their options carefully. The uncertainty was palpable as Canadians waited for their government's response. The entire country held its breath, knowing that the decisions made in the coming days would shape their future. The old partnership was gone, replaced by a high-stakes battle for economic survival. The friendly neighborly relations had turned into a tense standoff. The world watched as North America's quiet alliance shattered. International observers speculated on the long-term impacts of this trade war. The question now: how would Canada fight back? The government and its people were determined to find a way to turn the tide. The answer would change the continent's future. The decisions made in the coming months would redefine the economic landscape of North America for years to come. Confronted by US tariffs, Canada stood at a crossroads. Prime Minister Carney's government made a historic decision. Canada would reduce its dependence on the US and seek new global partners. On September 11, 2025, Carney announced a bold plan to re-engineer the Canadian economy for independence. The centerpiece, a massive infrastructure bill to redirect trade routes east and west, connecting Canada to Europe and Asia. For decades, Canada's economy flowed north-south. Now it would pivot outward. This was more than a reaction, it was a declaration of economic sovereignty. The plan included new ports, railways, and pipelines to open access to global markets. The old assumption of US reliability was gone. Canada would stand on its own. Carney framed this as an opportunity to build a stronger, more resilient nation. Canada was no longer content to be America's junior partner. The message: Canada would determine its own destiny. To make independence real, Canada launched ambitious infrastructure projects, the backbone of its pivot to Asia. The Kitimat LNG terminal expansion would double natural gas exports to energy-hungry Asian markets. Fast-tracked copper mines aimed to make Canada a key supplier for the green energy revolution. New clean energy investments, including a nuclear facility, would power industry without sacrificing environmental goals. A state-of-the-art Pacific port would speed Canadian goods to global markets. Streamlined regulations would fast-track railways, pipelines, and ports, removing bottlenecks. The goal: quickly build trade corridors to redirect Canada's economy away from the US. This westward pivot was a national effort to secure Canada's future on the world stage. The trade war's impact is real and painful for people on both sides. In Canada, tariffs triggered layoffs and factory slowdowns in key industries, spreading anxiety in entire communities. Canadian consumers faced shortages and rising prices. In the US, tariffs acted as a tax on companies relying on Canadian materials, raising costs for construction and manufacturing. Higher prices for homes, cars, and goods hit American consumers. A Yale study warned that if the conflict drags on, nearly 1 million Americans could be pushed into poverty by 2026. The pain is shared, hurting both economies and exposing their deep interdependence. Both governments face mounting pressure to find solutions. The longer the conflict lasts, the higher the cost for everyone. Carney's independence plan is popular, but it's also deeply divisive. Environmental groups warn that fast-tracking LNG and pipelines threatens Canada's climate commitments. Indigenous communities demand respect for treaty rights and full partnership in projects crossing their lands. The government's push for speed risks undermining consultation and reconciliation. Legal challenges and protests could delay or derail key projects. The government must balance urgent economic needs with environmental and social responsibilities. How Canada manages these internal conflicts will shape its future as much as the trade war itself. The path to independence is anything but smooth. The US-Canada showdown is part of a global shift away from cooperation toward economic nationalism. For years, globalization and free trade built complex supply chains and prosperity. Now, countries are raising barriers, prioritizing their own industries even at the cost of old alliances. America First is just one example. Similar trends are emerging worldwide. The US-Canada conflict shows even the closest partnerships can unravel in this new era. If these two can't cooperate, what hope is there for global trade? The consequences could be severe: broken supply chains, slower growth, and greater instability. The world is watching, and the stakes are high. The choices made in Washington and Ottawa are shaping a new, more divided global order. The age of easy globalization is ending. What comes next is uncertain. The US-Canada trade war marks the end of North America's era of easy cooperation. Canada's pivot to Asia and massive infrastructure investments signal a permanent shift. Both nations are confronting hard truths about dependence and self-interest. If Canada succeeds, trade patterns and alliances will change for good. The old partnership will be replaced by a more distant, complex relationship. This is about more than tariffs. It's the birth of a new world order. Nations everywhere are rethinking alliances in a more competitive, fragmented world. What rises from the ashes of North American unity will shape the future for all.